Hey, what's up guys? Today, I'll show you a horror film, Child's Play, Part 1. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The movie begins with a hectic chase scene in the middle of the streets at night. A serial killer named Charles is running away from the cops and engages in a shootout with them in the middle of the chaos. Charles gets shot by a detective who is following him on his smelly foot. This grabs the attention of his partner named Trader, who starts to panic like a chicken. Sensing imminent danger, Trader decides to abandon Charles and drives away while he still can. The goon runs out of options after getting betrayed, so he decides to run into a toy store. With the advantage presented to Detective, he tries to catch up to Charles, but gets shot, so he has to temporarily retreat. Now, Charles breaks into a toy store, where there are plenty of dolls on display. Detective follows his smell inside, and once again, there's a brief shootout between them. However, this time Charles is shot down by a lethal blow. He manages to crawl away from Detective, but realizes that he's going to die soon, so he angrily curses Detective for shooting him and Trader for abandoning him. Charles vows revenge upon Detective, and then he searches for a substitute body. As Detective continues to look for him inside the store, Charles manages to bump into an entire collection of dolls, known as Good Guy dolls. With no other option available within his sight, Charles plans to choose a muscular doll as his new body. He quickly grabs a Good Guy doll and starts chanting a demonic incantation to summon stormy dark skies upon the toy store. It's a lengthy sequence that ends with the storm striking the toy store with lightning. Detective rushes to the area like a sniffer dog, but is hit by the lightning and spots the dead body of Charles. He believes that Charles has died. However, the doll next to his body seems to be alive. The next day, we meet a young boy named Andy, who is watching some cartoons on TV. He isn't too impressed by what's being shown, so he decides to prepare breakfast and puts some bread into the toaster. However, Andy gets distracted when the TV plays a commercial talking about Good Guy dolls. He's impressed by the muscular dolls, but realizes that he's left his toast burning till it's crispy black. Andy still decides to add the burnt toast to the breakfast meal he's made for his mom. He enters Mom's room to wake her up, but it takes some time for her to open her crocodile eyes. It also turns out to be Andy's birthday today, and then Mom accepts her breakfast in bed. However, she eventually puts it aside in order to save her own belly. Now Mom wants to give Andy some cool birthday presents, so she takes him downstairs to check out what she's got for him. Unfortunately, Andy isn't too happy because Mom has only got boring clothes for him. Andy says that he wants a Good Guy doll, just like the one he'd seen on TV. However, Mom tells him to shut up and that she hasn't saved up enough money for the doll. Later at work, Mom's best friend Lady Bro tells her that there's a shady peddler outside selling a Good Guy doll for a cheap price. Mom can't believe it, but decides to pounce on this opportunity to check it out. After talking to the peddler, she learns that the Good Guy doll is indeed for sale, but the peddler asks for $50. Lady Bro drives a hard bargain, so the peddler decides to settle and offers the doll for $30. Lady Bro wants an even cheaper price, but the peddler refuses her and walks away. Now the women come back to the store, but their senior manager scolds them for taking an extended break without his permission. To make matters worse, he says that Mom will have to work an extra shift because the store is short-staffed today. This is bad news for Mom, but Lady Bro offers to spend time with Andy so that he doesn't feel lonely on his birthday. After getting a few hours off from work, Mom meets Andy and gives him the Good Guy doll, a muscular one. Naturally, Andy is ecstatic, so he starts talking to the doll, who introduces himself as Chucky. Later at night, Chucky notices the news talking about the brutal death of Charles the previous night and is seemingly intrigued by it. However, Lady Bro tells Andy it's time for bed, so she takes him and Chucky to his room so that he can get ready for bed. Now, Lady Bro cleans up while Andy brushes his teeth, but Chucky seemingly walks into the living room and switches on the TV so that he can continue watching the news. Lady Bro spots this and gets upset with Andy because she thinks that he's intentionally placed Chucky in front of the TV. Andy says that he's innocent, but Lady Bro obviously doesn't believe his child's shit. Anyway, she puts both Andy and Chucky to bed and tells Andy to have a good night's sleep. Chucky doesn't respond to Andy when he talks to him, but it seems as if he is planning something sinister. Later, Lady Bro reads a book, but then we see Chucky sneakily opening Andy's room. We switch to a POV shot that runs into the living room, but immediately hides after spotting Lady Bro. She gets scared for a moment and thinks that this is Andy, who's playing games with her. Lady Bro looks for Andy and spots a chair by the door, so she checks it out. There's a brief jump scare, after which Lady Bro spots some spilled flour on the floor. Lady Bro doesn't understand what's going on, and then she gets a call from Andy's mom, who wants to check up on Andy. Lady Bro tells her everything is fine, so she cuts the call and cleans the mess on the floor. She suddenly notices something suspicious behind the vase, so she quickly lifts it, but doesn't find anything behind the vase. Unfortunately for Lady Bro, she gets attacked by a hammer and is pushed out of the window, presumably by Chucky. Lady Bro falls to her death, and the area turns into a crime scene. Later, Mom shows up and is shocked to see the commotion outside her building. She quickly runs into her house and finds cops everywhere, so she fears the worst. Luckily, she finds Andy, who is safe and sound. Detective also happens to be there, so he takes Mom to the side, not to console her, but to tell her that Lady Bro is dead. Mom is devastated to hear the news, and Detective mentions that there are small footprints on the flowers spilled on the floor. He suspects something fishy, so he sniffs Andy's stinky shoes like a dog to see if they've got any flower prints on them. Mom gets upset and tells Detective to leave her and Andy alone, so he takes his cops out of the house. Andy is tucked into bed. He starts talking to Chucky, but notices that he has the flower prints on his shoes. Andy rushes to Mom to tell her that Chucky is the killer, but she obviously doesn't take him seriously and sends him back into his room. Detective seems to be intrigued, but Mom simply slams the door on him, along with his assistant named Mustache. Mustache senses some hormone tension between Detective and Mom, possibly by use of this sensitive mustache like a magnet, but he tells him to shut his mouth up with his mustache and focus on the suspected murder weapon, which is shown to be the same hammer used by Chucky on Lady Bro. Later, Mom hears Andy talking to Chucky in his room, so she checks up on him. Andy tells her that Chucky is claiming to be the killer Charles from the news, and even mentions that Chucky hated Lady Bro. This upsets Mom, and she tells Andy to behave himself because she doesn't believe that a plastic doll can speak. Andy realizes that his mom is still upset about Lady Bro's death, so he says he was just making up stories. Andy goes to sleep with Chucky next to him, but Mom listens in on the conversation that he has with Chucky. Chucky can see her shadow underneath the door, so he doesn't say anything suspicious. The next day in school, Mom reinforces the fact that Chucky is only a doll and not an actual person. She leaves Andy at school and goes to her job, but Andy uses this chance to walk away from class when Mom isn't looking. He takes the local train with Chucky, who leads him to an abandoned building where Trader is currently living. Andy places Chucky on a chair and goes to pee, but Chucky can't wait any longer, so he rushes inside the building. Trader is shown to be sleeping, so Chucky turns on the gas in the kitchen area. Now Andy realizes that Chucky is missing, and then Trader wakes up. He suspects something and starts shooting around the house. This alerts Andy, especially after he can't find Chucky, so he goes looking for him. Trader opens the door to the kitchen and instinctively shoots at the stove. This triggers an explosion that kills Trader and causes a mess. After that, Andy is taken into police custody, but he keeps talking to Chucky in front of Detective, Mustache, and even his mom. A doctor watches from a distance as Andy punches Chucky out of frustration when he doesn't respond to his requests. From this observation, the doctor says that Andy should spend some time in his institution as he might need help. Mom comes home with Chucky and without Andy, so she scolds Chucky and orders him to say something. It's of no use, so Mom checks Chucky's box, but she realizes that his batteries haven't been put inside him. She inspects Chucky immediately and decides to throw him into the fire to test if he's actually alive. That's when Chucky shows his true self and attacks Mom with his chicken figure. He even bites her during their struggle and eventually escapes the building. Mom isn't able to find him, so she goes to Detective for help. He doesn't believe her, so she decides to question the peddler who sold her the doll in the first place. Mom enters a shady alley and meets the peddler, but he starts to harass her sexy body. Luckily, Detective shows up to flex his police muscles and saves sexy Mom for his own good, after which he threatens the peddler to reveal where he found Chucky. The peddler mentions the same store where Detective had his encounter with Charles, so it makes him doubtful. Mom identifies that Chucky is a reincarnation of the killer Charles. Detective tells Mom that she's delusional, but she says she's going to check out Charles' house. Regardless, Detective drops her home and drives away. Suddenly, Chucky pops up and starts strangling him from behind. Detective and Chucky wrestle their muscles for a bit, but then they get into an accident. Chucky tries to attack Detective once more, but he manages to shoot him away after a tense montage. Later, Mom checks out Charles' house and bumps into Detective. He says that he believes she's not talking bullshit now and has pulled out Charles's file. There, they learn that Charles was able to transfer his consciousness into a doll because he was a voodoo priest's client. By now, Chucky has already reached the voodoo priest's home and questions him as to why he can feel pain now that he's been shot by Detective. The voodoo priest reveals that Chucky is slowly turning into a human, so Chucky demands to know how he can change his form. The voodoo priest refuses to give Chucky an answer, so he uses a voodoo doll to torture him. The voodoo priest eventually reveals that Chucky will have to transfer his soul into Andy if he wants to become human again. After that, Chucky stabs the voodoo priest and escapes the house before Detective and Mom reach the scene of the crime. The voodoo priest manages to stay alive long enough to tell Mom that Chucky can only be killed if they destroy his heart. Elsewhere, Chucky enters the doctor's institution and gets spotted by Andy. He asks for help, but the doctor ignores his chicken voice, so he acts fast like a chicken and lays a trap, but not an egg. Chucky sneaks into Andy's room and is about to attack him, but finds a pillow under the blanket instead of a body. Andy uses the distraction to run away from his room, but gets caught by the doctor, who is about to inject him with some tranquilizers. That's when Chucky shows up to flex his chicken figure and stabs the doctor. By use of electricity, he fries him to death like a fried turkey. Andy manages to escape. Soon after, Detective and Mom reach the institution along with the cops. Mustache tells them what happened, and then Mom realizes that Andy must have gone home. Meanwhile, Chucky enters Andy's house through the chimney and slowly approaches him as he waits with a baseball bat for protection. Chucky's jump scare fails to make an impact as Andy smacks him and runs away. Unfortunately, Chucky is able to knock him down, and then he begins his demonic incarnation. The storm starts to cover the building as Mom and Detective rush up the stairs. Things get intense, but Mom manages to stop Chucky just before he completes his incantation. Chucky attacks Mom, but Detective manages to put him down temporarily. However, Chucky stabs Detective in the leg and knocks him out after a brief struggle. Chucky goes after Mom next, but she manages to trap him in the fireplace. Andy gives her an assist by lighting a matchstick and setting Chucky on fire despite his deceptive words. Chucky seemingly burns to death like a fried turkey, and then Mom takes Andy with her to help Detective. However, Chucky manages to survive the attack and goes after Andy, looking extra burnt and creepy. Mom saves Andy and engages in a brief battle against Chucky, during which she eventually shoots off his head and seemingly kills him by shooting into his body. Now Mustache shows up with his iconic but smelly mustache and finds Detective, Mom, and Andy. He doesn't believe what they tell him about the killer doll, so he picks up Chucky's head and brings it to them. However, it seems as if Mom didn't shoot Chucky in the heart because he's still alive. Chucky's body strangles Mustache, but spares his iconic mustache. Mom manages to stop Chucky. Now, Detective uses his perfect aim and finally kills Chucky after shooting him in the heart. With the danger finally over, everyone decides to leave the room. The movie ends with Andy looking at Chucky's dead body one more time, hoping that he's dead for real. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.